All right, so before we get going, many of you may have taken the MS Word class that we had last week. This class will be structured very similar to that. For some people, it will be too fast. For some people, it will be too slow. But the idea is to go through the fundamental principles of Excel so that you can follow any instruction you see online or in another class. Until you get that kind of fundamental knowledge, it's somewhat difficult to follow anyone else's instruction. And many of us, like myself, are self-taught in Excel. I've been using Excel for 20 years. And when I first started doing it, you could buy a book at Barnes & Noble potentially. In fact, I did. There weren't these classes available, but now there's an enormous amount of resources out there. But it still helps to take an introductory class like this to kind of get your feet wet. All right. So first off, we're going to talk about versions. Microsoft Office, which is a collection of software, including Word and Excel, has been around for a long time. I've been teaching it since about 2000. And so you may have an older version of Excel, you may have a brand new version of Excel, or you might not have Excel at all. Any of those situations is okay to take this class. You do not have to have Excel. You do not have to have the latest version of Excel. I've got about every version of Excel you can think of. I don't bother switching from one to the other. They all work fine for me, especially for what we're going to be talking about today. The concepts are the same, whether it's Word Excel 2000 or Excel 2019. As you get the newer and newer versions, there's a lot more bells and whistles. There's a lot more higher-end things you can do. But for most of us, we're not going to use those anyways. So if you don't have Excel at all, or don't even have a computer, there is still resources out there for you. And I use all of these, by the way. One of them is to create a free Microsoft account. I'll show you how to do that. Another one is LibreOffice, which will give you a word processing program and a spreadsheet program. And then Google Sheets, very similar to Google Docs. It's just the spreadsheet component of your Google account. So real quick, if you have a Microsoft account, an MSN, an Outlook, a Hotmail email, you already have this. If you don't, it's not a bad idea to sign up for one because this is a really nice option. It's an online option. It's a web-based app. It's absolutely free. So all you have to do is create an account on the website I'm going to send you. And then once you log into that email, and this is just like any other email you've ever had, on the left-hand side of that web page, you're going to have something called the Apps Launcher, or what some people call the waffle. Once you click on that, you will have the opportunity to create an Excel document. It's as simple as that. It looks just like Excel. In fact, it works even better than the Word-based version within that account. There's a lot more there. And I've had a lot of success working with this particular version of Excel. Another thing you can do is you can download a free Office software suite, very similar to Microsoft Office Suite. LibreOffice is absolutely free. It's a nonprofit foundation that you certainly could donate to, but it's absolutely free. There are no viruses or ads associated with it. I'll give you the link for that also, and all you have to do is download the program, make sure that you have the correct version of the program, and for most of us who have computers within the last 10 years, it's going to be a Windows 64-bit. If you ever have any questions about that, do a little research on your computer and you can find out. And then you're going to get, again, a spreadsheet program that will be compatible, and that's the key here, will be compatible with Excel. Excel wasn't the first spreadsheet out there. I believe it was something called VisiCalc. And then there was Lotus 123. And then Excel came out, and since then it's been the predominant spreadsheet used throughout the world. All these options are programs that mimic and work well with Excel. So you create something in LibreOffice, you save it as an Excel file. And then when you send it to somebody, they open it, it opens in Excel. And they won't even know you created it in a free program. It works pretty slick. The other option, and I use this option too, is Google, in this case, Google Calc, it's called, not Google Docs. To get to this, you just have a Gmail account. And from there, you would go to your waffle. In this case, it's on the right-hand side, the application launcher. And then you choose Google Drive. There's one extra step in this process as opposed to the MSN process. Once you click on Drive, then you're going to click on New, and Google Sheets and then blank spreadsheet. There's several clicks here, but if you do it a few times, and by the way, everyone will receive a recording of this seminar so you can play it back, you'll get something that looks very similar to Excel. The reason I use this, and I use this several times today, is it's really good for sharing information with others online. Google Sheets does a fabulous job of that. So I could create a document on here. I could share it with my family for, let's say, signing up for meals for a family reunion. Everyone could enter into the same sheet. Everyone would see in real time what other people are entering. And it's absolutely free. So again, not a bad idea to play around with that a little bit. Okay, enough of the free stuff. We came here to talk about Excel. If you have Excel, certainly use Excel. And this is what it looks like. This version here is Excel 2013. That's what I have at work. I also have 2019 at home. You may have 2016. Anything from 2010 on up is going to look very, very similar. What we're going to talk about first here is something called the backstage view. And this is, again, very similar to Word. And that's the File tab right here. It may be colored in your version or not. But when you click on the File tab right there, what's going to happen is you're going to get kind of the backstage view. This is where all your settings are. And you can make things look different. You can add things. You can take away things. I don't recommend doing that too much when you're first getting going because if your version of Excel looks drastically different than what you're trying to follow through instruction, it's going to be much more difficult to have a good experience with that. So this whole options area right here, hold off on that a little bit. What we're going to be talking about are some of the more common tools we use in the backstage view. And by the way, if you ever need to get back out of the backstage view, you just click this arrow right here or hit escape and it will back you back out to the Excel spreadsheet. Another thing, many people who open up Excel in newer versions, this is what they'll see. They'll see the new tab or the new option, and they'll see maybe a whole bunch of templates for like balance sheets and inventory or whatever. In mine, it only shows one, and this is the one you usually click, which is new and then blank workbook, excuse me. Once you click on that, you get right to your spreadsheet. And you can open up new spreadsheets on top of each other. I quite often do this. If I need to try something out, I'll open up a new spreadsheet, I'll play around with that a little bit, and then maybe I'll move that information over to my other spreadsheet. You can open up as many of these as you want, but don't do that unless you absolutely have to, I guess. All right, next thing we're going to talk about in the backstage view, and again I got to that by clicking on File, was Open. Open is just opening a previously saved file. So you just click on the Open option here. And depending on how your computer is set up, older versions are not going to ask you to do anything extra. It's going to jump right to something called a dialog box. In this case, because I have some networked options through my account with my employer, there's a whole bunch of different things I could do from here. But for most of us, we're going to click on Computer and then Browse. Now, if this file is located in a folder that you've used recently, it might show up here in recently used folders. And you can certainly skip a step by jumping right to that. But I'm going to show you the way that works for all situations, and that is going to this Open dialog box. So if I click on Browse, I get this Open dialog box. This is the same exact process you would use in Word or PowerPoint or any other program. On the left-hand side, you have your kind of base locations, like your hard drive. So click on where that's going to, where their base location is, and then it'll show you on the right-hand side what in that base location. So in this case, I have a subfolder called Temp. I'm going to see what's inside that subfolder. If you don't have to go to a subfolder, that's fine. You may see your document sitting right on your desktop or wherever, and that's fine. Then once you find the file, you just double-click on it, and it will open up in Excel. And you'll see that you have the right file because on the top center of your document, it will say whatever that file name was. We're going to get to some questions in just a minute, but I want to get through the backstage view, and then we'll move on to a few questions. Next, we're going to talk about Save and Save As. They are two separate things that work very similarly the first time you use either. So if I save a document for the first time, it doesn't matter whether I click on Save or Save As. And the reason for that is that document doesn't have a location and it doesn't have a name. So whether you click on Save or Save As, it'll be the same thing. You'll click on one of those, you'll click on Computer, and then again you'll click on Browse. Very similar to how you would work Open. Once you click on Browse, you'll get the Save As dialog box. And exactly the same way, you choose where you want to put it, kind of that base location, and then choose any subfolders, in this case temp, and I would double click on that, and it would show me what's in that folder. Now you can see here there's an Intro to Excel file already here, but I want to name this file How to Save in Excel. So I would type that in, and now I've given it the two most important things a file ever has, a name and a location. Be very specific of when you do that, because if you don't, you'll have a hard time finding it. Then you just click on Save or hit Enter, and that particular document is now saved for the first time. Every time you save after that, you can just click on Save, and there's a variety of methods you can do that with, and it will just save over that same file in that same location. However, if you want to save a different version of that, like maybe you have timesheets. All right, someone is off mute. So if anyone was able to get themselves off mute somehow, I'd appreciate it if you put yourself on mute. All right, and then Save As just creates that additional version. And the last thing we're going to talk about before we take a little break for questions is Print. Print is set up specifically to how your computer interacts with your printer. Everyone has different types of printers. I have a network printer. Hold on just a second here. I'm going to see if I can find who is unmuted real quick. And we'll find that person that, let's see here. All right, seems to have solved itself. Okay, so within Print, a couple things to keep in mind. All the options available from your printer are going to be shown. If there's even more options, you can go to Printer Properties and get more involved options. Some of the things to keep in mind is whether you print on one side or two sides. And one side is simplex, two sides is duplex, fancy term for it prints on both sides of the paper. Obviously, if your printer isn't set up to do that, you're not going to be able to see that. A thing that is very important in Excel, and not so much in Word, is orientation. Orientation is how your piece of paper is set up. Let me see if I can just grab a piece of paper here. Okay. Do that one. Grab. Okay. So if I have this piece of paper here, and I hope you can see this, this would be something called Portrait. If I flip it over here, it's Landscape. So instead of being 8.5 by 11, it is now 11.5 by 8. The reason that's important in Excel is many times we have a whole bunch of columns across our document that we might not see in Word. And if I can fit all of those columns by switching the orientation, it saves paper. It's just a better way to print. And there's several ways to get to orientation, and we'll be talking about those as we go on. But right now, I'm going to pause for just a moment and ask Lori if there are any questions.
Art, I think it was me that was unmuted. Sorry about that, everyone. I thought I was muted. Okay, anyways, yes, we got some great questions coming in here. So the first one was from Raymond. He wants to know, will OpenOffice work?
So OpenOffice is the same, or was the same, as LibreOffice. There's a long story in the back, and you can Google it, but what happened was once the company Sun Microsystems that owned OpenOffice was bought out by, I believe, Cisco, the people involved in that project, that free project, did what they call a fork, and they went off on their own and created the LibreOffice Foundation. So it's very, very similar, and so the easy answer is yes. The more complicated answer is LibreOffice is in more active development, so you're probably going to get a more up-to-date program, but OpenOffice certainly works too.
Okay, great. The next question is, does Google Sheets have the same options as Excel?
No, it doesn't have the same options. Neither does the free version of Word. LibreOffice has a lot of it, but it has the most important ones, which means it can do calculations. Not everything works exactly the same. It's a great option for certain things, but of course Excel is better than any of them. So if you have Excel, that's great. If you didn't want to buy Excel and had to choose one, of course there's some variables there, but I would go with LibreOffice Calc simply because it has the most options. We take one more and then we'll move on.
Okay, Debbie wants to know, how can you tell what version you do have?
So what you can do is, if you were to click on, let me see, I'll bring up a live version of Excel. What you can do, and has everyone seen my screen here with Excel on it? Gloria, you can let me know.
Yes, Art, yep, we see it.
Okay. From here, you can go to Info, and you can, versions, hold on a second here, Account, there we go. If I click on Account, it's going to tell you what type you have. So in this one, I have Microsoft Office Professional Plus 2013. So again, that would be Backstage View. See how these terms come in handy? I click on Backstage View, and I click on Account, and that might be one of the options. Another option is you can go through your Start menu and look for Microsoft Office, and then it will tell you what version of Office you have installed also. By the way, one of the things I learned the hard way when I bought my first real computer was that not all Windows operating systems come with Microsoft Office. That is an additional fee. The other option that does come with Office, though, is something called WordPad. So WordPad is very much like a light version of Word. It works very well, and you can create resumes with it, and it's a nice little program. It just has a lot less options, and you're going to see that in virtually every version of Windows that you have. So WordPad would be another option. All right. So now, one last thing on print. This is even more important than when I had mentioned it with Word, and you'll see how much more important as we go on. One of the weird things about Excel is it's not necessarily information you plan on printing. It's for calculating information and then giving summary information, meaning you're only going to print part of what you're doing. And that, because of that, the sum total of everything you've entered may be much larger than what you actually want to show. So on the bottom of your print page, you can see, and I know it's really small to see here, this is one of 28 pages that will print. So before you hit print for the second time, make absolutely sure that it's printing off what you want it to print off. In a case where you only want to print the page you currently have, then all you have to do is, on the settings option, you can click on current sheet. That's one of the options, or selection. And there's other ways you can do this, but make sure you're not printing everything if you only plan on printing part of it. All right, excuse me. Next we're going to talk about the quick access toolbar. This will show above or below something we're going to call the ribbon in a minute. These are just quick access to often used tools like save. Remember I said there's multiple ways of doing save? Well, right on the top left here, there's a little, what appears to be a diskette still, and if I click on that, it's just going to save over that file in that location. If I haven't yet saved, it's going to ask me where I want to put it and what I want to call it, but it's much, much quicker than clicking on File and Save. It's one less click. If you want to add more options here, and by the way, the other option that's extremely important in Excel is undo, and then there's redo right here, undo and redo. But if I click that little drop down, what I'm going to get is additional options that I can add to the quick access toolbar. I highly recommend not adding quick print. That's a situational option that I will put on if I know I have to open 20 files in a row and quickly print them. Otherwise, you could get into real trouble with quick print because it's not going to ask or tell you how many pages you're printing. If you want a whole bunch more options, you can click on more commands, and there are literally thousands of options you can add. Of course, they're not all going to fit, but if there's something very specific to your needs that you find yourself doing 5 clicks to get to, you can add it to the quick access toolbar to make yourself more efficient. The quick access toolbar actually is part of a larger location, at least when it's on the top here, of something called the title bar. We already mentioned that a little bit. It gives you the title of your document. If your document says that it's Book 1, that means that you probably haven't saved that information yet, because that's the default name of any document you open. That's a blank document. So make sure you're saving early and often. I save before I enter anything. You didn't used to be able to do that, but I give my information a name and a location as soon as I start. That way, I know all I have to do is click on Save anytime I want to save more information. The keyboard shortcut, and I'll give everyone a list of keyboard shortcuts, for that is Control-S. And that means you hold down the Control button on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, and while holding that down, you tap the letter S. You don't have to memorize a bunch of keyboard shortcuts, but I tell you what, that's the one everyone should memorize because it's that important. If all I have to do to save a document is hit Control-S, I'm going to do it consistently. And I will tell you, in putting this document together that you're seeing today, I lost about a half-hour of work because I didn't hit Save enough. So anyways, we all learned that the hard way. The other thing we're going to talk about on the title bar is the program control buttons. And these are at the far right-hand side of your screen, and these are exactly the same as you would see in any window, any folder, any program. You've got the minimize, which will make your document go down to your taskbar. It'll still be open, you just won't be able to see it. You have the restore down or maximize. It toggles back and forth between those two options. It just makes your window sizable. And then you have close. And there is a safety catch in close that if you haven't saved the latest information you have entered, it will ask you if you want to save the latest changes. I'm just going to go back one here. If your ribbon is, or if you're not seeing any options here, all you're seeing is this grid, you might have this area hidden. And if that happens, all you have to do is click on this little icon here, and it'll give you the options of bringing this back. And that's what we're going to talk about, what you would bring back here in a minute. Excel is very strange in that it's hard to describe any one piece without already having the definitions for everything else. So it seems in many cases that we're explaining things using terms we haven't used yet. So that's why it's important to kind of go over this kind of information a couple times and go through it at your own pace. And I will give you a free training guide that will allow you to do that at the end of today's session. So the thing I was just mentioning that may or may not be there is something called the ribbon. And again, this is the last thing we're going to talk about that is exactly the same as Microsoft Word. And that's a good thing. One of the really neat things about Word and Excel is they're virtually identical in how you save, how you open, a lot of the same formats. So if you learn Word, you already know a lot of what you need to know to do Excel. You're not relearning everything. And to a lesser extent, PowerPoint. So the ribbon is just all your options. They're laid out in various tabs. And if I click on a tab, in this case the page layout tab, it's going to overlay options specific to that category. Now they are supposed to make sense. They don't always, but it is supposed to make sense. So if you have a guess, click on it. And at the worst, it's not there. What you're looking for. If the tool you want is not on the tab you click on, you just click on a different tab. So I'm going to zoom in on page layout and show you that there's some additional options within this tab to further identify where you're at. And these are called groupings. So in this case, there are, let me count them here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groupings in the page layout tab. The one I'm pointing to currently is page setup, and it'll give me all the information specific to setting up your page. If it can't fit all this information, and by the way, page setup is one of the biggest categories, what you can do is you can click on an item on the bottom right of that grouping called a dialog box launcher. And it just opens up another window, just like open, just like save. Dialog boxes just ask us questions and give us options. So if I were to click on that, I get a whole nother dialog box with additional tabs and all sorts of options. And by the way, it looks pretty simple. There are hundreds of options available in this simple little dialog box. The cool thing is, we don't need hundreds of options. Normally, what we need is going to be on the tab itself. It's just the less used options that are also going to be on that page or that dialog box. All right, before we go on, are there any questions we need to get to, Glory?
Yes, we're having some good questions come in here, Art. So the next one is, can you encrypt, or if not, at least password protect a save file that may have some sensitive information in it?
Yeah, you can actually, and that's through when you save the file itself. There's a specific way based on whatever version you have. I do that for certain things. I will recommend though that you be a little careful with that, because if you forget, it's very hard to break into those files. There's a lot of different methods for doing this. Some people use a password protected zip file. Some people will password protect the Word file. I'll include a link to show you exactly how to do that. There's one file I use for my personal passwords that I've had password protected for years. If we have a little bit of time at the end of today, I'll demonstrate it, but yes, you can. Something else to think about, not only can you password protect things, but you can protect things from being edited. And that's another level that you can put passwords on too. The reason you might want to do this is you may spend months putting together the perfect spreadsheet for your corporation or for your nonprofit group or for your fundraising drive. And then someone else will get that file and they will delete everything, or they will mess up all that hard work. So there are options for even protecting a file, and that information would be under, let's see here, I think it's under data, nope, it's under review. On the review tab, you can protect a sheet. And by the way, all of this has happened to me. So when I say these worst case scenarios, it's happened to me. I've had a coworker delete 8 hours of work, and the next time I gave that coworker my sheet, it was protected. And the idea here is they can enter information into certain cells, but they can't change the formulas or some other areas. That's getting a little bit above what we're here to talk about today, but in later versions of Excel training, we hope to offer those types of information also. We can take one more question, Gloria.
Okay, the next question is, can you print to a file such as a PDF?
Yes. Yeah, and it gets a little confusing when someone says print to a file, and I know that's the terminology used, but if you just want to save a document as a PDF, almost all current programs can do that. You can do this with Google Docs. You can do this with LibreOffice. I believe you can do it with a web-based version of Word. But if I wanted to save this as a PDF, I would click on Save As, and then I would click on Browse, or in this case, Computer, and Browse. And I would do the Save As type. I would click on PDF. See if I can find it here. It's there someplace. You're maybe just going to have to trust me. There it is, right there. And what'll happen then is it will save a version of this file as a PDF. Now, the reason you might do that is maybe you're putting together a report with a bar graph and all that sort of thing. But you don't necessarily need anyone to see how you got to that point. You don't need them to see your formulas or any of the summary data. You just might want them to see the charts themselves. And doing it as a PDF has the benefit of they can't edit it. So I hope that answered your question. All right. So now we're going to go on to some information that is specific to Excel. Everything we've done up to this point has been pretty much the same as we did last week with Word. Now it starts being different. And the reason is Microsoft Word works mainly with text, with narrative text. You know, Excel works with items, or more specifically numbers. Doesn't mean that both can't do both. They can. You can actually put formulas into Microsoft Word, but I would never do that. It's not the right tool. Excel has a lot of tools available, but it works spectacularly with lists and with like database items and more specifically numbers. So there is something on Excel that isn't on Word. It's called the formula bar, and it's right below the ribbon. So what the formula bar is it allows you to enter calculations, or it allows you to see what you typed into that cell. And I'll define cell here in a little bit, but the idea is, when I'm going to zoom in a little bit, when you enter information into, say I wanted to calculate, in this simple example, 7 plus 13. We can do that in our head, right? The answer is 20. But how I got about that 20 was I entered in a formula. So what exists in this cell is on the formula bar. But what shows in the cell is the result. So if you're ever wondering what's actually in a cell, look at the formula bar. The result or the formatted example of it will show in this cell. We do edit sometimes from the formula bar, even simple text, so you can use this right off the bat, but it is a bit confusing when you click somewhere and something else shows up here. That's because this is the calculation you used. Here's the result of that calculation. Another thing we use on this same bar here is something called the name box. Name box is wherever you click, it's going to show you where you are. So this is something we're going to define as a cell, and right now I'm in cell A1, so the name box right there is going to show A1. The other thing the name box does is if you specifically name a group of information something. So if I were to select all of this information, I could give it a name. So in this case, I gave it the name weekdays. There's reasons we do that. It's for formulas, it's for functions. The reason I like to talk about it now is if you don't know that groups of numbers can have names, it really throws you for a loop when you see it in a formula. So if it said, I want you to sum up weekdays, well, what does that mean? All that means is I want you to add up all the numbers that are in that named range, weekdays. Don't worry, we're not going to do that today, but I do want to take you on a tour of Excel, and this just happens to be the name box. All right, next thing we're going to talk about, and this is very important, are columns and rows. They're at the base of everything you do in Excel. It's what makes it vastly different than Microsoft Word. In Microsoft Word, we have one document that goes on forever. You can keep typing until you are 20 years older than you are now, and you're probably still going to be able to type in that same document, because Microsoft Word documents, as long as they're just text, don't take up much space on your computers. You could type a long time in that same document. Excel is a little bit different. Excel doesn't have an infinite amount of space, but it does have a lot, a whole lot. And that space is defined as columns and rows. So the columns are across the top, and they go what appear to be A through V. Does anyone know how far that goes? Columns and rows. Columns are across the top, and I think the question I had asked, and I was wondering why no one was responding to me, was how many columns do you think we have? It goes to V here. Anyone want to hazard a guess? ZZ. I see someone said ZZ. That's very good. So the answer is XFD. And the way you can do that is you can actually hold the control button down and hit the right arrow key. And the right arrow keys are on the arrow keys in the bottom right of your computer. And you can see that that goes all the way to XFD. That's like 16,000 plus. And then the question is, how many do you think it goes down? We got 36 rows here. Anyone want to hazard a guess at how many rows we have? See if anyone will put it in there. No clue. Thanks, Sherry, for being honest. It's not something you'd actually guess because it's not a nice round number. Someone said 10,000. It's actually 1,048,576. Oh, Denise, very, very close. Sometimes computers come up with these odd numbers, and it's like, why would 1,048,576 be a number they chose? Why would they just choose 1 million? The answer is, in computers, you see things doubled, and that's what they work off. So it's like 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and you keep doubling and doubling and doubling, and eventually you get to what XFD represents and what 1,048,576. So that means we have about 1 billion cells in every single worksheet. Worksheets are part of a workbook. So when you take a look at the top of your screen, it will say Book 2 in this case. That's the book, and this is where it's very different than Microsoft Word. A book is a collection of sheets. So I'm going to go down back to my demonstration here. Let's go to, well, first off, let's talk about cells, and then we'll get down to the sheets. A cell is where a column and a row meet. So in this case, I'm on cell E5. You can see in the name box, it says E5. If I were to click right here, I'd be on B2. It's pretty simple, but it's very important to understand that because that's what we use. We use references of cells rather than talking about what's in those cells. And that's why but many people get thrown off by Excel because they think it's algebra. If I were to say this formula is equals A1 plus B2 divided by C3, that sounds like variables. That sounds like something I don't need to talk about because it's too complicated. It's actually very simple. All you're saying is the information that happens to be in E5 minus the information that happens to be in B2. And the reason we do this is so that when that information changes, the results are still relevant. And we talk about that in the next section of Excel, but it's important to understand what cells are. And more importantly, in this case, what cell indicator boxes represent. So this bolded information here at E5, if I zoom in on that, it's just a box, but that box will contain either data, as far as numbers, numeric data, or it will involve alphanumeric data, which is considered alphabetic data. That means numbers and letters. It can also include formulas, functions, formats, comments, all sorts of different things. But when I put something into a cell, wherever I grab that cell from with my mouse will determine how it interacts. So if I were to grab it from right up here, like say I had the number 2 in here, and I grabbed it from right here and I drug it up one cell, it would actually cut and paste that or move that information. If I were to grab it right in the middle and click and drag, it's going to select some information. And then in a very special case, if I grab it from the bottom right, it's going to do something called fill that information. I'll give you a quick demonstration of that. I'm going to zoom way in. So if I have the number 2 here, and I grab it from the border, my mouse changes, and I can click and drag that to someplace else. If I grab it from the middle, it's going to select information. But if I grab it very specially from this bottom right corner, notice my pointer turns into a black cross, it will allow me to do some kind of cool things. It'll allow me to continue a list, or in this case with Monday, a customized list without me having to type anything in. The fill handle is really neat. There's a lot of things you can do with it, but it is part of something called the cell indicator box. And wherever you click, that's where your cell indicator box is. At this time, we'll do a pause for a few questions. Glory?
Yes, we're having a lot of good questions come in, Art, and I'm not sure we're going to have time to answer all of them. So I just want to let everybody know that we will answer your questions when we send you the email response back. So if you're not getting your questions answered right at the moment, we will get them answered for you. One of the questions was, how do you get back to a calculation formula for a cell when it only shows the result?
Oh, excellent question. I'll bring Excel back up here. Now again, if you're not ready for formulas or functions or any of that kind of stuff, that's okay. This is still good information to kind of think about. So in this case, if I have, let's say, a couple numbers here, and I want to add those numbers up, that's how simple it could be. There's a process by which I do that, and I'm just going to do that without really explaining it, because what the person is asking is, how do I get back to this formula? And the formula here happened to be equals B1 plus B2, adding this number, which happens to be in B1, plus this number, which happens to be in B2. So instead of saying equals 1 plus 2, I say this equals B1 plus B2. All I have to do to get back to that is either edit it up here, or when I click up there, it shows. And it even shows color coordinated options. So here's the blue cell, here's the red cell. There's all sorts of different options you can do for this. You could click on the cell and hit the function key F2, and that'll bring it up. And you could edit it right within the cell, or you could double click on that cell. So there's all sorts of options. But remember, overall, the result of a calculation shows up in the cell. What you actually typed in shows up in the formula bar. Okay, we'll take one more question.
Okay, this one is Microsoft Excel format slightly different on Mac or Apple laptops?
Yeah, so one of the weird things I have found, because Microsoft is such a predominantly used Office software suite, it's even used on Apple. Apple has their own software. They have a spreadsheet, but very few people use it. So what they've done is they've created a version of Microsoft Office that works with Macs or Apple computers. I find that when you create something on LibreOffice, it converts better than if you create something in Apple's version of Office and then open on a Windows computer, which is just strange to me. It works pretty well. In fact, it works very well. But occasionally you'll have some little tiny things that don't quite convert over when you open it in a Windows. I've seen this a lot with Microsoft Word, from an Apple to if someone creates a Microsoft Word resume on an Apple and then they send it to me, I open it up. Sometimes it doesn't have the same amount of pages, or things are just minor different. So it's always good to check. All right. So let's go on to sheet tabs, and this is what I had meant to get back to. I kind of got a little ahead of myself. Remember that a document in Excel is a workbook. That's what it's called. And the reason it's called a book is because it's devised or put together with at least one sheet. It used to show 3 sheets right off the bat, but it now shows just 1 sheet. And the sheet is just a way of organizing your information. So this works really well because you can open up a lot of similar information in one file. So instead of opening up 12 different, let's give an example of 12 different balance sheets, January, February, March, April, May, all the way to December for, let's say, 2020, you would open up a folder called Balance Sheets, or excuse me, a workbook called Balance Sheets 2020, and then you would name each of the individual sheets January, February, March, April, May. And there's many, many reasons to do this. 1, it's just easier. 2, it allows me to get summary data. So I could say, how much did we spend on advertising through the year? Give me the total year spending on lunches, whatever. All that information is easily calculated within the same file, or in this case, workbook. So to rename a worksheet or a spreadsheet, all you have to do is go down to where it says Sheet 1, and then you either double-click on it, or you right-click on it and click Rename. And then what you're able to do is type in the new name. And give it something that makes sense to you, that you're going to figure out later. You can even right-click on and color-code it, and you can move these around very easily to reorder them. If you want to create a new worksheet, you can create as many as you want. You just click on the plus. And guess what? You've got 17 billion more cells to work with. Each one of these sheets has 17 billion cells plus. So every time you click on plus, you get another large amount of information to work with, potentially. All right. And there's the plus. The last thing we're going to talk about as far as the layout is the status bar. This is not as robust as the status bar is in Microsoft Word, so we're only going to focus in on one aspect of it, or actually 2. Status bar is on the bottom of your screen, where Word is often blue. The color code for Excel happens to be green. For the last 20 years, they've used green. So on the bottom right-hand side of this, we have 2 options to talk about. I'm going to zoom in on that. First option is the view buttons. Normal view is what you should be working on almost all the time. But there are times when we want to do a couple other things. So there's page layout view here, and there's page break preview. Those are more advanced options, and you don't really have to worry about them, you know, when you're just getting started. But what it'll show you is the headers and the footers potentially. It'll allow you to, you know, make a page break at a certain point in your information so that it jumps to the next printing page. You would see that through these options. Normally, we're going to do through the normal option. All right, and then Zoom. I use Zoom all the time. Zoom and the view buttons, by the way, don't change how your document is printed, just how you're viewing it. So if I want to zoom way in on a cell, all I have to do is move this slider over and it's going to look much larger. Of course, you won't be able to see as much of your spreadsheet at that time, but sometimes you just want to zoom in because it's easier to deal with, and especially if you're presenting information. Let's take a look at this. So I'm going to bring up my Excel document here. I mean, imagine if you had to see it this way. Really hard to see. So I can zoom in. And by the way, I very seldom will use the actual zoom. I hold the control key down, and then I use my scroll wheel on my mouse, and that allows me to zoom in and out on many programs, including a lot of web browsers, but in Word and Excel, I use this all the time. Sorry if I'm making people's eyes go buggy here. But you can notice that the columns change size. It won't change how they print, however. Okay. All right, any questions on that before we move on to entering data?
Well, I'd like to just let you know that a lot of the participants are asking if you're going to be offering more classes in Excel,
yes,
in addition to this one.
Yeah, here's something. I want everyone to have realistic expectations of what can be done in an hour and a half. I've taught Excel as a 5-week course. Certainly could be longer than that. We could spend an entire hour on the fill handle. So the idea of this is we'll never get to, unless I can do this for the rest of my career, all the information that's available on Excel, nor do we have to. What we'll do is we will do 3 sessions on the introductory parts of Excel. And by the way, you can do introductory your entire career, as long as you know how to enter formulas, on how to put up some summary data through maybe some charts, how to protect your document. That's actually pretty heady stuff. But we're not going to get into anything like writing macros or anything like that. So hour-and-a-half sessions, if you sign up for all 3, you will basically be getting 4.5 hours of Excel. But the key is you'll be able to ask questions. And that's what you can't do with the information that I'm going to be sending you as far as the free training that's out there. You can take it as far as you want. The information I'm going to give you allows you to go wherever you would like with Excel. But what we'll be doing here in the 3 sessions is making sure you understand what people use day in and day out for Excel. All right. So as far as entering data into Excel, it works a little differently than in Word because of the cell indicator box. So in this case right here, I have Monday in cell D3, okay? And I'm going to put my cell indicator box in cell C3, and I'm going to type in, Excel is a great program, okay? Now look how that appears to go from C3 to D3, and actually a little bit into E3. As soon as I hit enter on that, though, it's going to say, okay, you're done, and now I'm going to format that information based on what is the settings are with this program. So notice what happens there. It truncates or cuts off it only as much as can fit into that cell. Now, remember what I said, that the formula bar represents what was actually entered. So if I were to click on C3, it would still say Excel is a great program in the formula bar because that's what I actually entered. What can fit is going to show in the cell itself. So if I type that information into a cell that is not formatted or a cell that does not have something in the adjacent cell, it just enters it and it bleeds over into those other cells, or at least appears to. There's nothing in D4 or DE4. It's all in C4. But as long as there's nothing kind of blocking it, it will go over into those other cells. When you want to edit data, and this is very similar to the question we had about how do I expose a formula once it's been entered, all you have to do is click on that cell, and if I want to replace it, I just type in. I don't have to hit delete. I don't have to select it and remove it. When you click on a cell, think of it as you've selected all that information already, and the next thing you type will replace it. Of course, that's not always what we want to have happen. Sometimes we actually do want to, like in this case, maybe we want to edit some information. So then what I would do is I would either double click on that cell and I'll get a cursor, or I would click on it and hit F2, the function key F2 at the top of your keyboard will bring you into an editing mode, or I could also go up here. I could click on that cell and I could edit it up here, okay? Those are the options for entering data and editing data. Speaking of data, there's going to be a quiz here in just a moment.
While you're taking a drink, I'm going to throw in a quick question because I think this is very appropriate for where you're at right now. Angela is wondering, how can you make it wrap around so that you can see all that is written?
Yeah, so that's called text wrapping. And remember I was talking about, let's go, I'll bring up Excel here. Remember I was talking about all these dialog boxes, these extra information that you have. So if I click on the Home tab, and let's say I have information right here, and there's something there, and I start typing, blah, 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 and it kind of truncates it. You know, it stops it. Actually, it looks like the same exact information, but I truly do have more information here. In older versions of Excel, you'd have to go to a dialog box, but look at right here. We have the wrap text option in the alignment grouping of our Home tab. So I just click on wrap text, and then that information is going to make the row taller, okay? You can make rows taller yourself, or you can make columns wider. If you want to do it yourself, all you have to do is click and drag between the border of two of them. You can do that, but this wrap text is an automatic thing that allows for the largest value to be, you know, shown as wrapped text. I hope that answers your question. All right. So getting back to types of data, if you type information in, it does not determine what kind of information it is until you hit enter or click out of it. Usually a good idea to hit enter to get out of a cell. You can actually even hit Control Enter to enter that data and stay in the same cell, which seems kind of weird, but there are reasons to do that. So it's not going to determine what you're typing until you're done typing. And you being done typing is determined by hitting the Enter key. So in this case, I typed in 1, 2, 3, and the Excel right aligned it. And the reason it did that is because numbers are always going to be right aligned, unless you change that. And then I typed in ABC. And once I hit Enter, it left aligned it, okay? If I were to type in 1, 2, 0, 0, what do you think it will do? Put it in the chat box if you would. Is it going to left align it or right align it? Right, split. That's a lot of people are saying right, and that would seem to make sense, but it's not. It left aligns it. Okay. I had someone fail a test, fairly advanced Excel test I had to give at one point, and the reason was exactly what's happening here. He thought he had put a period, and he had actually put a comma. Well, commas are only appropriate after 3 numbers. So this isn't a representation of an actual number, and if it's not a number, it's got to be something else. So then it's considered alphanumeric. In this case, it would be left aligned, and it cannot be calculated. So if you're looking at a bunch of data and one of your pieces of data is aligned differently than the rest, pay special attention to that, and I'll show you here. I'm going to bring up, again, Word, and I'll type in that 1200, and notice that it is left aligned. In fact, I'll exaggerate this. If I just change that, if I edit that to be 12.00, watch what happens when I hit Enter. It right aligns it, and it drops the zeros, and that's just because that's the way numbers are formatted. Any zeros that are to the right of the decimal place without a number at the end just get dropped off by default. So that's kind of a trick question, but I appreciate everyone participating. Oh, someone said 12,000. I caught that comment. Yeah, 12,000, like this, is correctly formatted. So it will right-align it. In fact, there's even a format called the comma format that you can apply to text that will automatically put that in. And normally you'd want to do that. But as long as it's properly formatted as a number, it works. All right, let's go on to selecting. So if you want to select information, and that's the key to formatting anything. If you want to format something, meaning to change the way it looks, or you want to delete a bunch of things, you first have to select it. So to select an entire row or column is very simple, but many times people misunderstand this. So pay close attention here. If I want to select column, let's say D, okay, a lot of people would click right here. Well, that's not D, that's D1. Column D means you actually click on the column heading D, and it will select every single number in that entire column, or excuse me, every single cell, and whatever happens to be in that cell, those cells, all the way down to 1,048,576. So be aware you're selecting a lot of information when you click on the heading, but I still do it a lot, and this is done a lot. If I want to select rows, same thing. I would click on the left-hand side under like 2, and it would select all the way to XFD. If I want to select just a certain amount of information, it's just like in Microsoft Word, I just click and drag. Make sure that you're starting in the middle of a cell to do that, because remember, if you click on a border of a cell, it's going to move that cell. It won't select it. One other option that's used quite a bit is select all. So on the top left-hand side of your Excel spreadsheet is this little option right here. It looks different based on whatever version you're on. And if I click right there, it's going to select all 17 billion cells. Now, let me give you a cautionary tale, because this has happened to me, and I hope it never happens to you. If I were to go down to XFD, 1,048,576, and type in the word hi, how many pages do you think would print up? Now, that's all I have, by the way. I don't have any other text in the entire document. I have 2 letters. If I were to hit quick print right now, how many do you think? Oh, a ream, okay? All? So many. I like that. So many. Too many, yes. It would print off an astounding, and I'm going to zoom in on this on the bottom, 40,628,131 pages. Now, you wouldn't have enough paper. Your printer would long ago have worn out before it got to that. In a previous version of Excel, I had someone do this when there was less cells, and they printed off 25,000 pages. Even that would burn out a printer. So in those cases, you just run over, you grab the paper out of it, or you unplug the printer or whatever. But that really speaks to what I was talking about before. Make sure you understand what it is printing. And especially if you receive a document from someone else, someone emails you a document, and it says, oh, here's the spreadsheet you asked for. Well, make sure you're looking at this before you hit print. There's all sorts of different ways of printing only a selection or just a work page or spread page, not the entire workbook. Be very careful about that, because it is different in Excel than it would be in Word. All right, we are going to spend about 15, 20 minutes on questions, and I hope there's some good questions here. I'm sure there are, but there's a couple more things I wanted to tell you today, and that is where that information as far as, oh, by the way, there's a zoom in on those 40 million pages. What do you do from here? You know, maybe you've already known a lot of this stuff and you got a couple things here or there, but now you're really committed to, hey, I really want to take ownership of a program that could enhance my career. And it can, by the way. Word and Excel are the 2 programs everyone should spend some time in, because they're non-proprietary, meaning that they're not specific to any industry. You could use it to do the popcorn sales for your Boy Scouts troop. You could use it to be with the CEO of a multinational company. They use a lot of the same programs. Of course, they have some very specific programs that they use that cost a lot of money, but they're using the same version of Excel and Word that we are. So it really helps to be able to have that base knowledge in Word and Excel, because a lot of employers are looking for it. To do that, there's some free resources, and the one I'm going to talk about, because I've been using it for years, and it is the same exact one I used last week for Word, is GCF. If you were to go to Google and just type in GCF Excel 2016 or whatever version of Excel you have, you then click on the free Excel 2016 tutorial, and you'll get 30-some lessons or thereabout of everything you ever wanted to know, and probably a lot more than you ever thought was possible about Excel. This doesn't cover everything, but it covers everything a reasonable employer could expect someone to know, and then some. The stopping point I give on Word, or if you want to put a barrier, not a barrier, if you want to put a stop point on where do I need to stop, I recommend getting all the way to pivot tables. They're not that difficult, but it is kind of tricky to understand how to get them. They're easy to do, but it's a little bit more complicated to understand what they're for. So if you went all the way to lesson 27 twice, you've done your due diligence. You've done everything you need to do to make yourself ready for an employer's expectations. I have to say, though, I've run into people who've used Excel their entire career that don't know half of what is in this free course. They've gotten by just fine, but they weren't doing it the best way, and they were taking a lot more time to do something that could have been automated, potentially, or could have been done in a more efficient manner. Some other training resources that are newly available to residents in the state of Minnesota until the end of this year is Coursera. Now, I didn't talk about this in the Word course because there's not nearly as many options for Microsoft Word as there are for Excel. Excel has it has a fan base, I have to tell you, and I'm one of them. I use Excel every day in my personal and professional life. I'm on forums for Excel. I love the program. Because of that, it's used so widely and for so many different things, there's a lot more available. So these are just a sampling of what Glory put together for me today. These are 9 courses you can take for free off of Coursera. And these are excellent courses. I audited one of the courses. They're great. They're put on by colleges and universities and businesses. Really, the opportunities are endless to learn Excel. So take advantage, but start at the beginning. Even if you're pretty advanced, start at the beginning so you don't miss anything. Once you've done that, there are some simple assessments you can take. The one I'm showing here is the North Star Digital Literacy Assessment. You would just click on Microsoft Excel. It asks you 31 questions, and it'll let you know if you're, at a stage where you could start promoting yourself. I don't like when people put proficient in Excel. You may be okay with that, an employer may be okay with it, but it's too vague a term. Tell what you can do with it, able to create formulas and functions to calculate financial outcomes and graph those summary data, graph that summary data. That tells an employer what you can do with the skills. Someone who takes a 2-hour class from me in Excel might say they're proficient. Someone who knows much more than me in Excel, and there's a lot of people who know a lot more than me in Excel, they would also call themselves proficient. And on paper, it looks the same. So differentiate yourself by showing what you can do with the program, as opposed to just putting an adjective in front of it. All right. So I'm going to leave this screen up because I always want everyone to have the opportunity to connect with your local career force location for online workshops, to get your resume reviewed, to get one-on-one assistance, to do mock interviews. But at this point, I'm going to bring up Excel, and I will take any questions that we have. Glory?
Okay, so Cheryl was wondering, where can you find templates to start an Excel project if you don't want to start from scratch?
So you're not going to see it on mine because mine is set up a little differently, but if you go to File and New, usually that's where you're going to find them. If you go to the New option, I only have blank workbooks, but now you see, okay, if I gave it a little bit, here's all the templates. So you get calendars, household monthly budget, all sorts of different things. I'm going to reiterate something I said earlier. Maybe I said, maybe I didn't. It's very easy for people to see why you would use Word. In your personal life, it's easy to do that, writing letters, writing notes to yourself. People have a harder time thinking about, well, how could I possibly use Excel outside of work? Limitless possibilities there, by the way. And it's important that you do that because all the training you take will fade very quickly unless you use it in a work situation or personally. So try to find some way of integrating Excel into what you do, what you're interested in. I'll give you a quick example. I love to look at birds. Birding is a huge, huge hobby of mine. So I keep track of every single bird I see for each year from my house in the state of Minnesota, and I do that through a Google Sheet. And it allows me to organize, filter, I do calculations on it, and it's fun because I'm interested in that topic. I just use Excel as a reason to practice. Okay.
Awesome. Another question is, sometimes I get a bunch of pound symbols in an entire column for some reason. How do I fix that?
Sure. That's a very common thing. I'll never forget that happening to my manager, and I became her favorite worker when I showed her how to fix it. Okay? So what happens is Excel will show you truncated words. It will not show you truncated numbers. And the reason is, if I truncate the number 10, or excuse me, the number 1,000, and it shows up as 100, someone may look at that spreadsheet and say, oh, we have 100 options up, or that cost $100. So instead of showing you a truncated number, it shows you a bunch of pound signs. You can click on that to see what it is. It'll show in the formula bar. Or you could double click between the two columns and it will auto fit to the largest selection. Okay? Again, that's when you get a bunch of pound symbols, all you have to do is widen your column to make them all visible.
Great. Okay, thank you, Art. The next one is, how do I print a single spreadsheet on 2 consecutive pages so it's big enough to read?
Okay. I'm not sure I'm quite understanding. Some of it has to do with the way you work with your columns. You know, if you have something like this, you can shrink your columns to make things work. You can also force things to fit onto one page, and there's a couple of different options for that. But if you go to File and Print, you can talk about, we're going to print this from this page to this page. So if I have 20 pages and I want to print from page 3 to page 6 or page 5, it'll only print those pages on consecutive. Or there's a lot of different options. You can print active sheets. You can print selection. You can even, what you can do is open up a new workbook and copy and paste that information into that workbook or that worksheet just for ease of printing. So there's a ton of different options for that. You just got to play around with it a little bit. And you can also select something and then click on print selection. It'll only print that selection.
Great. The next question is, how do you darken cell lines?
Oh, yeah, okay. That's a good one. There's a couple of different things here. These cell lines do not print, okay? That has something to do with just your, as light or as dark as they are, you can work with your monitor, the monitor settings to make things lighter or darker. But if you want to make these show up, like you want to actually have them print, what you can do is select that information, and then on your font grouping of your home tab, there's an option called borders. And what you can do is choose that drop down and click on all borders, and then you'll get thick, readable, printable borders. If you wanted to just have this information, you wanted these like dimmer, more dim grid lines to actually print, some people would like that. You can go to your page layout view, page layout tab. And then on the page setup dialog box, and this is one you should play around with a lot because there's tons of options here. You can click on the sheet tab and you can say show grid lines. And what that'll do is when you print, they actually show. They'll show the grid lines. I hope that's what was being asked.
I think you answered it, Art.
Okay. One other option there, by the way, on the page layout grouping, you could say grid lines view or not view. So if you're not seeing them at all, in this sheet options grouping of the page layout, there's an option for viewing grid lines or not viewing them at all. So if you're going to put on a presentation and you don't want to have the grid lines, you can make them not be seen.
Great, good, that helps. Another one was when I hit the delete, it clears the selected cells, but the space is still there. How do I get rid of an entire row or column?
Sure. So let me just do this. I'm just going to put up a whole bunch of information. Okay, so I've got a whole bunch of information here, and let's say I want to get rid of all the 4s. I think what they're asking is if I select that and hit delete, they're all gone. However, the space is still there. And there are times when we truly want to get rid of that space. So what you would do here is you would go to the column itself. You can right-click on it and hit delete. Okay? And that will collapse that column. And it will, like it would never existed. It creates a vacuum, and then what was in F is now in E. Excel differentiates delete from something called clear. So this little item here in your editing grouping, or excuse me, your editing grouping on the Home tab has all sorts of different options. You can clear, you can delete, you can clear formats, contents, comments. There's all sorts of different things that can be in a cell. But if you just want to get rid of everything, then you want to choose delete from a menu option. Delete on your keyboard is the same as clear, which is confusing, I know. However, that's the difference.
Great. This one goes right along with it. It says, how do I have certain cells highlighted?
Not sure I understand the question. I just click and drag to highlight. Is that what they're talking about? So you put your pointer in the middle of a cell or somewhere other than the edge of the cell. You would click and hold, and then you drag. And if you drag to the left, it will create something called a range, by the way. When you do a group of cells, what you're doing is you are selecting a range of cells. And that's whatever the top left cell is, all the way to the bottom right cell. So this range right here would be cell D8 through E10. And there's reasons we use that going forward, but think of any selection, any group of cells that you select as a range of cells, and you're always going to have the first cell look a little different. It's going to be white, because that's where things are going to happen. If I enter something, it's going to happen in that cell.
There's more comment to that. I think that they're referring to emphasizing the cells like using the paint bucket. So if they wanted a cell to be yellow.
So yeah, you could highlight here. You could use fill color. That's on the font grouping. In Excel, we do use color a lot more than we would use in at least narrative text for Word. So one of the tricks, if you're going to do this, tend to go in this kind of grouping or across this row. You don't want to do anything really harsh, like these are really harsh, and they become very hard to read. Like the 2 there is black on darker red, so it's harder to read. But if I went up here to this row, you can kind of see how it's much easier to read that 2. So you want to have much, I guess, more muted. This shade of green, by the way, is one of the most used in Excel, and it really helps people to identify, you know, what your eye is drawn to a certain total or headings or something like that.
Great. What does the conditional formatting button do?
Oh, wow. That's a conversation in and of itself, I guess. We could do a lot off that. Conditional formatting means that it's going to do something based on parameters you set. So I'll give you an example. Let's say, what's the date today?
10.
Okay, so if I go 9 to 20, and I use my fill handle, and by the way, dates are great with fill handles, and I say, I want this to highlight today's date. I do this all the time for if I want to find out what I need to do on a certain date. I don't want to have to search for it. I just want a nice little highlight. So what I would do is I would select that information, and I would go to conditional formatting. And by the way, there's hundreds of options on conditional formatting. There's all sorts of different things you're going to use this for, could use this for. And I'm just going to go to highlight cell rules and say equal to, or a date occurring, excuse me. So if I want to find, I don't know why it defaults to yesterday, but if I want to say I want it to highlight today, it's going to do that. I know that may seem silly. Why don't I just highlight today? The cool thing is Excel looks at your clock. So if I kept this going, if I save this file and reopened it tomorrow, this would be highlighted, and then this one, and then this one. So conditional formattings are just used to apply formats based on some information that you define. And there is a whole section on that in the GCF Learn Free.
Great. This one says, also, if your content ran to a second page, how do you make your column show on page 2?
Oh, well, that's a great question. And it's a very common one, actually. There's two things to that. Let me bring up, I brought up, just so it's not me typing a whole bunch of weird text here. So here's an example. I've got this document here that I created years and years and years ago that has a whole bunch of information. It has like 900 rows, okay? But you notice as soon as I go from row 35 to 36, I lose that. So if I were to print this off, people would only see this at the top of the first page. So there's two things to think of here. If just for viewing purposes, if I want to lock this in, meaning that no matter where I go, I want to lock this in, all I would do is select that row, and I would go to, I can get it here. My WebEx is getting in the way. And I could go to data, or excuse me, it's under view. And I could go to freeze panes. What that's going to do for me is it's going to allow me to freeze the top row. It's only 2 clicks, but boy, this is really helpful. Because now when I scroll through, you can see that it locked in that top row. And I can go all the way down to the bottom, and I'm still going to get that. Now, if you want to print this, that's a different story. It's a little more complicated. But what you would do there is you would go to page layout, and then that page setup. And remember, third time I mentioned it, play around with the page setup dialog box because there's a lot there. And then I would go to the sheet tab. You don't have to write this down. It'll be in the video. And then what I have to do is say rows to repeat at the top. Now, you either know this or you don't, but how you'd have to put this in is $1:, $1. That just means lock in the top column. If I wanted it to be the first, row. If I wanted it to be the first 5 rows, it would be $1:, $5. I know it seems a little weird, but this is also where you would change your page order and all sorts of different things. Now, what this does here is if I click OK on this, and now I go to File, Print, you can see here's the first page, but if I click the next page, you see that I only entered it once, but it's going to print on both pages. All pages, actually. All 46 pages are going to have that title. Now, the reason it looks like it's trailing off is because I probably should do it as changing my orientation to landscape. And then I can see everything. Okay.
Perfect. A few more questions. How do you put a heading on the columns?
A heading on columns. So if you, there's two ways I could think of that. Like in this case, these are headings to columns. I'm not sure exactly if that's what you're talking about, but if I had this information, let's say, I hate to do this, but I'm gonna just delete this. Okay, so I deleted it completely and I realized I need to have headings here. You can always insert additional rows above what's already there. In fact, I'll show you a neat little trick for that. If I want to insert something above here, all I do is I go to row 1, I right click, and I click on insert. And then I can put my titles here. Another option, if you need to insert multiple, what you can do instead of doing that 5 times, what you could do is you could select 5 rows. And then you right click and insert, and it'll insert 5 rows. It just saves a lot of time. And you get a nice little counter on the side that does that for you. If instead you're talking about headers and footers in relation to, putting them on each page, then that's a different option, and you would do that through the page setup dialog box, and then there's the headers and footers. Again, going back for the 4th time to this very important dialog box, and what you would do is you would put your headers and your footers in there. It looks a little bit different than how you do it in Word, but it works pretty nice. It won't show here, though. It won't show until you print it. I think we have time for one more question, Glory. Make it a good one.
Yes, okay. So is there computer training where you can perform the task while being taught?
Yeah, so the GCF, which is totally awesome, I've used it since it's been around. In GCF, you will get files they send you, and some of them will be flash files that you can actually click, and you'll see if you're right or not. But it gives you tests or assignments at the end of every lesson, or most lessons, so you actually get to do it. So what I recommend doing on that is if you have access to 2 monitors, you have the instruction on one side, and then you have the document that you open from that website on the other. Let me just real quick here, see if I can bring that up. So I'm going to bring up GCF Word 2016. And if I go to, let's say, Word? Oh, I'm in Word. I didn't mean to be in Word. Go to Excel. And let's say I'm going to go to Cell Basics. You can download this practice workbook, and then you work off it as you go. And at the end, it will give you an exercise to say, here's a challenge. If I can find it. And by the way, everything I talked about today is in here. In fact, there's a lot more in here. I guess I should use my scroll bar. And they'll say, open that workbook, do all this stuff, and here's what it should look like at the end. So you have a goal, and you have an example of what it should look like, and that's really important. Because otherwise, you're doing what we're doing here today, which is what we can do. However, it's not the best way to learn. It's a good way to get an introduction. This is the best way to learn. So I hope that answers your question. We are at 2:29. We did get quite a few people that registered for this, so we will do another section. How it's going to be done is we'll alternate between Word and Excel. So next week will be intermediate Word, following week will be intermediate Excel, and then we'll do advanced Word, advanced Excel. But I want to make sure everyone understands by intermediate and advanced we mean within the standard tools. We're not going to get way, way, way out there because you could spend a lifetime learning all there is to know about these programs. Thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate you sticking with us during the technical issues. We're all learning as we go on these WebExes and these Zooms and such. I appreciate your time. I wish you the best of luck, and I challenge you. I challenge you to go to GCF and try it. You'll find that you will learn a lot. Thanks everyone. Have a great day.